At this point, we're going to start looking at working with some of these elements that we have in place at the moment, and we're going to start styling them so that they look more like our consistent layout that we've seen in layout.html. If you were to open up layout.html, you would see, of course, that we happen to have very simple design as we've been talking about. So what I want to be doing is addressing what we're going to do with the headlines and what we're going to be doing with the navigational scheme as well. So if you're working inside of reset.css, the first thing we want to be targeting is this header section. Remember, inside our code we have header defined as we do right here. So because it is not a div and because it is the header element itself, notice I don't have an ID associated with it. So all we really need to do is to go to our CSS and we're going to introduce a new CSS rule. This rule is going to be based around the tag, and the tag that we're using is the header tag. We'll define this in reset CSS. So if I click OK, first thing I really want to be doing in this situation is addressing a couple of things. I'm not really dealing with the typography at this moment. All I really want to do is to define things like color and size. So the thing that I want to be doing is making this header be a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go to the box category, and the width can be defined. Since our container element is 960, I could easily come in here and give it a width of 960 pixels as well. However, even if we don't define that width, it's going to take up the entire area available to it. In other words, it's a block level element. So it's just going to stretch out, and we don't really even need to define a width for it. However, I do want it to be a little bit bigger. So we're going to define specifically a height value for it. Let's start out with a height value of 100 pixels, and we'll see what that looks like. If you apply that, you can also see that we've made some height differential in here, and we've got much more space than we had just a second ago. Another thing that I want to be doing is taking this header that we happen to have here, and as we can see, a lot bigger, but now I want to go to the background color, and let's just give it a background color of something like 999. That's going to give us a little bit of a gray, and as you can see, it's a little darker than the other one. So by pressing apply, you'll be able to see exactly what we've just done. The only other thing that we can do inside of this area is perhaps define something like a line height. For example, if I wanted this header to be in the center of this area, and when I say header, I mean the H1 headline that we have here. One way that we could do that is by going to the typography. I could give it a line height that is exactly the same as its height. So, since we have a height of 100 pixels, in line height, I could also say 100 pixels. If I press apply, take a look at what happens. It's a neat little trick that you can remember. If you want to center an element vertically, as I'm doing right here, one of the ways of doing that is to just set the line height, as I've done here, to be equal to its containing element. So 100 pixels in the line height, 100 pixels in the header's height as well. Now, there's not really much else I want to be doing at this point, but later on we'll inevitably be placing something inside of here, and if we do that, we might also want to be working with the positioning of relative. But we'll discuss that a little bit later. So I'm going to click OK. At this point, I'm pretty happy with the way this is looking. But now I want to create a navigation section and the three subheaders that are going to be placed one next to each other. First, let's take care of this nav section. There's not really much I want to do, primarily because it is placed horizontally, as we saw in the layout example. So what that means is we're going to be putting in some content in this area that is going to be stretched out horizontally. So at the moment, the only thing I really want to be doing is going into our code view, and here is our nav. Well, first of all, what I think I'll do is put a little space here, and let's give it an ID. Now the only reason I'm mentioning this is because perhaps later on I want to have another nav tag, and this other nav tag may actually be in the side or the aside element. If that's the case, we need to differentiate one nav from another. So I'm going to call this nav main hyphen nav. And that's all I really need to do with this area here. If I hit refresh, go to the design view, you can see that nothing's changed here. So let's come in here and we're going to add some CSS styles for this. If I press on the new CSS rule, it's not wrapper I'm interested in, but rather it is main hyphen nav. It's in reset. I'll click OK. Now, we are not really going to be doing too much in this area, except I'm going to take the background color and let's add another one. Still keeping in the grayscales, so I'm going to say 636363. If we press apply, you'll see that that's a nice darker gray. Click OK, and we're done with that for now. The only thing we should really also do in this area, the nav section, is more than likely come in and go to our code view. And in the code view, what I want you to do is to take a look at the content inside of it, and we can get rid of that content for the moment. Well, now that it's empty, I want to also place in a couple of list items in here. So we can do this in the design view as well. If you can't see it in here, then that's fine because we've collapsed the element. So you might have to go back to the code view. And then right inside that code view, we can still use the same trick that we saw before. I can create an unordered list, and then in these list items, I can start putting in some information. Let's imagine, since this is kind of like a sample company website, that we're going to have products as well. I can hit refresh, and now if we go into the design view, you can see where the product section happens to be located. Well, if I press my return key, we can add another section, services. I'll hit it again, and let's say support. Let's take a look in the code view and see what's happening. Beautiful. It's giving us list items just the way I wanted. Let's go back to design and finish this off. We'll also add two other ones, something like history, and maybe even a contact section. Since we've got these ready and in place, all we need to do now is style them. So let's come back in the next video and we'll style these links.